Friends, welcome to Washington National Cathedral on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. We are so thrilled that you are joining us both on Facebook and here in Zoom. And my name is Michelle Dibley. I'm the program director here and have the pleasure of introducing our host for tonight, after which we will watch a short video from Dean Randy Hollerith, who couldn't be with us but was eager to make sure that you all know that the cathedral is here and supporting, and that he cares very much about the conversation that's about to happen. So the Reverend Canon Dr. Stephanie Spellers will be moderating our conversation tonight with guests that she will introduce shortly. She is the Canon to the Presiding Bishop for Evangelism, Reconciliation, and Creation Care. So that last bit is why we are here with her and our guests tonight. She is a former journalist, an author, and most importantly, a Christian who cares deeply about the work of the church in the world. And we are so eager to welcome her and the Presiding Bishop's office with us tonight. So we'll take a look at a welcome video from Dean Hollerith. You'll learn a little bit more about our Honest to God series, and then the next faces you'll see are those of Canon Spellers, as well as our guests tonight. They'll have a conversation, and then that will be followed by some opportunities to answer questions from all of you. So Margaret, if you can turn us over to Dean Hollerith, and then to Stephanie, here we'll go.
Welcome, friends. My name is Randy Hollerith, and I'm the Dean of Washington National Cathedral. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special edition of Honest to God. Normally, in our Honest to God conversations, we bring together leaders who are people of faith to discuss how their faith influences their leadership and their outlook on the world. But tonight, in this special edition, Canon Stephanie Spellers will host a conversation looking at how faith influences our calling to care for God's creation. On this 50th anniversary of Earth Day, nothing could be clearer than the fact that we are watching the temperatures rise on the Earth, that global warming is real, that ecological degradation is taking place, and that as faithful people, we have a calling to care for the gifts that God has given us. In the story of creation, we were made stewards of the earth to care for it. And as such, we have much to learn and much to do to be able to live into that calling. So thank you for being with us tonight, and I hope you will enjoy this special edition of Honest to God.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Stephanie Spellers, and it is such a pleasure to be able to welcome you now to Honest to God, and a conversation especially about Earth Day. And in particular, it's so poignant to be able to come together for this 50th celebration of Earth Day. So blessings to you, and thank you to Washington National Cathedral and the Episcopal Church's Office for Creation Care for bringing us together. Please join me before we meet our panelists. Join me in a word of prayer. Let us pray. Holy God, your mercy is over all your works, and in the web of life, each creature has its role and place. We praise you for ocelot and owl, cactus and kelp, lichen and whale. We honor you for whirlwind and lava, tide and topsoil, cliff and marsh. Give us hearts and minds eager to care for your planet, humility to recognize all creatures as your beloved ones, justice to share the resources of the earth with all its inhabitants, and love not limited by our ignorance. This we pray in the name of Jesus, who unifies what is far off and what is near, and in whom, by grace and the working of your Holy Spirit, all things hold together. Amen.
Amen.
So So we have gathered and are about to hear some incredible wisdom from leaders that many of you know, and we all can surely trust and learn from. I'd like to introduce them to you now. First off, we'll be hearing this evening from the Reverend Dr. Margaret Bullitt-Jonas, who is the Missioner for Creation Care in the Episcopal Diocese of Western Massachusetts and the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ. Her most recent book, which I love, is called Rooted and Rising, Voices of Courage in a Time of Climate Crisis. She's a longtime climate activist, and she truly believes that the ecological crisis from climate change, the extinction of species, really calls us to claim our kinship with all of creation, look deeply into sources of hope, and work together to build a just and sustainable future. Thank you for all that you will bring, Margaret. We'll also be hearing this evening from Brother Right Reverend David Rice, who is the Bishop of the Diocese of San Joaquin in California, and is formerly a bishop in the Anglican Church in Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia. These are, of course, two wonderful inclusive dioceses that both focus on missional ministry. And to this day, Bishop Rice is known for his collaborative spirit and his work across denominations and faiths. He is also known to many of us as a strong, strong voice for social justice. And he has led the Diocese of San Joaquin into the forefront of creation care ministry. Welcome to you, Bishop David. And it is an honor to be able to welcome our sister, Reverend Traci Blackmon, who is the Associate General Minister for Justice and Local Church Ministries for the United Church of Christ, and still holds it down as Senior Pastor of the Christ the King United Church of Christ in Florissant, Missouri. As a featured voice on many regional, national, and international forums, Reverend Blackmon's life's work focuses on faith-filled communal resistance to systemic injustice. Many of us know her for her leadership in Ferguson following the killing of Michael Brown. And she has certainly been honored by many organizations for that work, including the NAACP, the Urban League, and the National Council of Jewish Women. She is still, of course, rooted in local church ministry, where she makes sure that justice continues to roll down for all of God's people. Welcome to you, Reverend Blackmon.
Thank you.
So this evening, we'll have some time just to share some questions with our panelists, and then we'll be able to open it up so that you who are listening will be able to offer questions, and we'll see where the Spirit takes us. For now, one thing we know is we are brought together in deep love for God, for each other, and for creation. We are brought together by a commitment that is so much more than political. It is truly a faith commitment. And I personally look forward to learning and being inspired. I hope you do too. So to start off, I wonder if maybe Bishop David, if you would share a bit for us about looking back, and I'm not going to assume that you remember the first Earth Day 50 years ago, my brother.
I do, sister. I do.
But certainly in that time, from 50 years ago until where we stand now, there are a lot of things that we've hopefully figured out as a nation, as a species, about our relationship with creation. There's also a lot of areas maybe where we've been moving backwards. Can you just give us a sense of where you see movement over these last 50 years?
Thank you, Canon Stephanie. I want to offer just a quick preface. I know we have a huge amount of time before I respond. And there may be some in this social platform who are curious, why we're giving attention on Earth Day to this subject in these pandemic days. We've heard a considerable amount over the last few weeks about flattening the curve of COVID-19 through social distancing, sheltering in place, wearing masks and gloves, and the like. We are, as we all know, without a doubt, in a crisis. There is another crisis, albeit perhaps traveling at a somewhat slower pace, and that is the ecological crisis. Global change is generally slower and perhaps somewhat more multifaceted than this pandemic, but it is equally unstoppable unless we make significant changes. So we must flatten the curve regarding our consumption of resources. There was a junior senator from Wisconsin, Gaylord Nelson, who was instrumental in initiating, developing, and promoting what was known a half century ago as Earth Day. Nelson said these words in the early beginnings of 1970, I quote, "Our goal is not just an environment of clean air, water, and scenic beauty. The objective is an environment of decency, quality, and mutual respect for all other human beings and all living creatures." End of quote. I believe that Nelson was calling for deep sociological, ecological, and I would add spiritual change. So how have we done over the last 50 years, if I heard the question correctly? Well, we started out extremely well in the early 70s, and you were referring to my age. Thank you, sis. I was in my early teens. It was the advent of the EPA, 1970, Environmental Protection Agency. And we saw over the next 4 years, from 70 to 74, significant legislation from the Clean Air Act in 70 to the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 72 to Safe Drinking Water Act in 74. It was a great start. I would say over these 50 years, we have seen throughout the world, in many instances, cleaner air, cleaner rivers, pesticide reduction, ozone recovery, and those are all positives. There's no question. And equally, with regards to our communal response, we've seen an environmental movement, we've seen activism, and we've seen community engagement. I would say simply, we have seen a growing emphasis and adherence to repurposing, reusing, and recycling. And I would suggest that there's at least an intellectual assent to a reduction of a carbon footprint. Now, the other side of the ledger, very quickly. We continue to burn coal and oil and natural gas at our own peril. The wildfire season in the West in which we live is now a season. We see rising sea levels, mass extinction of animals, forests continue to vanish, polar caps are melting continued. We see methane emissions have not decreased, and we see the world consumed by our once used plastics. We have a lot of work to do. And then from a faith community perspective, before I finish, is I think that we are more often than not making creation care and these conversations central to our conversations, central to our sermons, central to our legislation, and that's the way it has to be. The difficulty is we are so still individualized in this country that it's easy to refer to default positions of the past.
Margaret and Traci, I wonder if either of you want to weigh in on this query about the arc that we've been traveling on over these last 50 years.
Maybe I'll just add a few words. We could be holding this conversation all night long. There's a lot to say, but I appreciate the bishop's comments about the coronavirus as the context for this, because maybe I'll just quickly say that I think there's a great deal we can learn from this pandemic that applies to the climate crisis. I'm hoping we can learn the lessons that it's offering us in the midst of this huge suffering. A couple of examples of the lessons we can learn are science matters, facts matter. I'm hoping that the American public will come away from this experience with a new respect for science and our need to listen to what scientists are saying for the sake of public health. Also, we've learned that if we're motivated, we can change our behavior very quickly. And it's going to be messy, it's going to be complicated, but if we're motivated, either whether it's by fear or by love, we know we have to change behavior. We've just experienced as a society, as a globe, we can do it very fast. And that can be good news. That could be good news regarding the climate crisis.
I would simply add that I think we've also learned some things about ourselves. It's one thing to advocate for a wonderful climate and a just environment if you don't perceive it as having to inconvenience you. And so for a while, the image of creation justice, of environmental justice, was those uninhabited places where we could have pure water and we could go hiking on the weekends, etc. But over these years, we've learned that our personal choices really impact the environment in which we live, and that making a safe environment and a sustainable environment is going to require some sacrificial things from our pleasurable lives. And I think that's a great learning that we have. We rolled back some. The current administration has rolled back, I think it's about 95 EPA regulations. So that's a step backwards for me. But I think as a people, we have also learned to connect systems of injustice. So we are learning that all of these systems are interconnected. And environmental justice with racial justice, with economic justice, all of them are interconnected. And in this moment of COVID-19, we're actually seeing that interconnectedness play out.
It may be that my next question ties well into what you were just referencing, Reverend Blackmon. So I wonder, as you look at work going on, especially in communities of faith, for climate justice and to care for creation, what gives you hope? What for you feels like, yes, keep moving in that direction?
Millions of young people in the street striking for climate justice gives me great hope. It gives me hope not just for the future, but for the present day. The relentless call to save ourselves and to save this earth gives me great hope. Youth activists like Greta Thunberg and Isari Hari, I can't remember her name, how you say it, but there are several young activists who have taken center stage on this, along with activists that have been at it for a very long time. And this connection, this generational connection, and the utter refusal to just sit idly by gives me great hope. When I look back at 50 years ago, it was that kind of activism that brought the political change that we need. And I am hopeful that this activism of today, if we don't let up, will do the same.
Amen. From your lips to the ears of God and of those young ones. Margaret and David, how about you? What's giving you hope?
Well, thank you. And Traci, thanks for your response. As sometimes clever bishop, I'm really careful about telling people for whom to vote. You know, I don't talk about voting red or blue. I do oftentimes, though, talk about vote Earth. And I think that's where the hope is. And again, building on what I heard from Traci, is that I'm encouraged across the political landscape in this country, ever increasingly, there are candidates out there who have Earth written all over them with regards to what they say and what they're about. I think that's extremely hopeful. And again, as Traci said, the millennial population in our midst, they want to change the world and they want to make it a better world. And it's all about that voting Earth. So I'm encouraged by that.
I'll jump in. There's actually quite a lot that gives me hope. So just to add a new thread to the tapestry, I'm seeing more people begin to reclaim a sense of the sacredness of the natural world, a sense of reverence for the web of life that God entrusted to our care. And I'm hoping that for those of us during this time of sheltering in place, those of us who are able to, I hope all of us will find who are able to who have some access to the natural world, will take the opportunity to spend some time outdoors and find that felt connection with the natural world. Because really, all the Christian mystics, going all the way back to Augustine, they're saying it's in the natural world. Going back to St. Paul, we read the gospel first through the natural world. That's the first place that the divine is given to us. And then we're given the book of the Bible. That's the second book of the second gospel book is the Bible. So I take hope from people who are intentionally making connection with the earth as a form of spiritual practice. Of it's not just us trying to save the earth, it's also the earth, God working through the earth, working to heal us, healing our alienation and our estrangement from our brother sister beings. This is a really new phenomenon, to have us humans thinking that we're above and separate from the rest of the earth. This is a time for homecoming for all of us. And I hope we're making that journey.
Mhm.
And Stephanie, if I may, I mean, building on what Margaret has said, we see life occurring amid really horrific circumstances right now. We, as you know, Stephanie, live close to an old rail trail where oftentimes pre-COVID-19, I'm the only runner or cyclist there. It is chock full of people today, every day during these pandemic times. And my deep hope and my prayer is that will continue. And as Margaret's saying, that there will be attached to that a deep appreciation for this, which has been gifted to us.
A word that keeps coming to mind for me as I look at the connections between COVID-19 and the climate crisis is interconnection. And that just as we now look around and realize, wow, whatever the physical crisis, the human situation in Wuhan province in China, that's now happening here in Harlem. And so if we thought that there was not a connection, now we know there is. And that the same is true about the climate. If you thought that what was happening to a certain species of bird had no relationship with your flourishing, that's not true. Like everything is so very connected, it is at once a tenet of faith, that interconnection, but it's also just good science.
We're also finding out, Stephanie, that I did a different webinar earlier today with Reverend Dr. Ben Chavis. And just a little while ago, the United Church of Christ released a study on toxic air, the air that we breathe. And one of the places that we highlighted was Cancer Alley in Louisiana. It's odd that, it's not odd, it's predictable that Cancer Alley ranked really high for poisonous air pollution. And it's also the place with the highest number of COVID-19 cases. There are connections on air quality and what we are experiencing with COVID-19 as well. And it would behoove us to pay attention to the impact that poisoning the environment has on our personal health, as well as on our environment.
Amen. Amen. So there are a lot of people who may have, over really just the last few years, or even for some the last year or so, tuned in to the climate crisis. Maybe they're wondering right now, what can I do? How can I act on whatever is this growing sense of consciousness? I wonder, maybe, Margaret, if you want to start out with this one, if you'll share with us some about what is it that people can do once they start to see these connections, once they realize the crisis is real and that their actions have some impact and that together we have some power too. Where do we even begin to start?
Sure. Yeah, the climate crisis can be overwhelming. And the good news is there is a lot we can do. And before I just sort of throw out some ideas or thoughts about what we can do, I will say, sometimes we can say to ourselves, it doesn't really matter what I do. I'm just so small. I'm just one person. So what's the point of me bothering? As Traci was saying, that there can be something sacrificial or at least inconvenient about making changes in my life. But we know that we need to make changes. So I think it helps to make the changes that we can, partly is for our own moral integrity. So you wake up in the morning, you feel like you're living a little more in alignment with your best values, with your Christian values. So there's a deeper sense of integrity. there's also social power in making changes, because what my neighbor does influences me. If I see that my neighbor is putting up solar panels, I might start thinking, hey, maybe I could take a look at the possibility of putting up solar panels. So we affect each other. So if any one of us starts making good changes, the rest of us might start noticing. And finally, another reason to make a change is it's so easy to fall into despair and to a sense of helplessness. So if we focus on what is it that I can do, I can't do everything, but I can do something, and I will do that something that I am given to do, that then builds a sense of power and agency. So if I can take that step, maybe I can take the next step. So let me just throw some ideas out of things we can do as individuals, as congregations, and on a more collective level. Individuals in the Episcopal Church, I would say, go take a look at the Sustaining Earth, Our Island Home website. It's a carbon tracker website where it's full of good information about how your household can reduce its energy. You do an assessment. You can do an assessment of how are you doing right now, and then you can make changes and decide which changes would you like to make. Everything from eating lower on the food chain, eating less meat, moving to a plant-based diet. That's something that most of us can start doing tonight if we feel like it, so that plus you'll save money. Recycling more, driving less, flying less. I predict in the last month or two, most of us have been flying a lot less, and we can take a look at that. How much of my flying is actually really necessary? And if I must fly, okay, then I will buy carbon offsets for the flights. But God willing, we're going to come out of this pandemic no longer taking airplane travel as a norm, it's something to reevaluate. So there's plenty we can do as individuals. I feel like I don't even need to say the list, because probably most of us know the list. So it's simply a matter of pulling up our socks and taking action, actually doing it. As communities of faith, there's so much we can do. I think a lot of people are grappling with helplessness. As communities of faith, we say we are placing ourselves in the presence of a power that will never die. And as we gather in faith and look into each other's faces and open ourselves to the presence of the divine, we are tapping into an unstoppable, never-ending energy and love that surely is stronger than death. That's what our faith is all about. So I think that our faith communities have a crucial role to play right now in the human community as people realize what a crisis we're in. So we have rituals, we have ceremonies. I hope we will have more climate preaching. I want to just commission every preacher out there, lay and ordained. Will you please preach about climate justice? There are plenty of resources to help us do that. And finally, on a collective level, as Traci was saying, well, as Bishop was saying, we need to build a movement. We can't solve this alone. So I would encourage everyone to find a way to connect with the larger climate movement. It might be joining 350.org, which is that wonderful global grassroots movement started by Bill McKibben. It might be thinking about voting. I've just been looking into something called the Environmental Voter Project, which is nonpartisan, but it's only trying to get people who care about the environment to vote, because apparently people who care about the environment tend not to vote. What's that about? So it's already in 2020 contacted more than 2 million people who care about the environment to get them to vote. So anyway, there's plenty more, but the good news is there is so much we can do. I'll stop there.
Excellent. I can see that in the chat box, folks are already starting to share some resources, suggestions that they just want to make sure get out there. Maybe either Traci or David, is there anything that you just want to flag and make sure we know about? And maybe I'll shift gear a little bit and say, maybe even if you want to tell us a little about an action you've taken personally, something you've been inspired to do for the sake of creation. Maybe something you didn't want to do when you started, but you kept on, and now you're so grateful that you did. Maybe your witness will help us to think about what we could be doing.
Thank you, Canon. Just very quickly, sorry, Traci. I appreciate the list that we heard from Margaret. I think the lists are really important. I think the list should be available to people like a good sermon that's preached over and over again. It's good liturgy. And I think that people, typically speaking, are looking for ways to make a difference. So that's one anthropological comment I want to make. For me, and both Traci and Margaret already mentioned travel, and I want to say something about that in terms of amending the world in which I live, which is connected to COVID-19. I live in a large territory. This diocese goes forever and ever through the Central Valley of California, the High Sierras. And given the past of this diocese, without getting into the weeds, everyone, the diocese experienced a split from the Episcopal Church a decade ago, and that was allowed by isolationism. And so when I arrived 6 years ago, I worked really hard, as I've continued over the last 6 years, of getting out there to get to know everybody. I'm as itinerant as anybody you could imagine. And now, given this pandemic, amended behavior, I'm not traveling the way I did, obviously, and I may never travel the way I did again. And how I reconcile that with what I've inherited and what I've established, that is really perplexing for me. It's hard work. But I do know that we have to reduce this carbon footprint. I have to be true to what I'm saying to my clergy. I say it perpetually, preach creation care every time you preach and model that in your life. Well, one of the ways that I have to model that is less travel and continuing what we're doing here in the days before us.
I think I want to pick up on what David said, and also something Margaret said. I in our run through earlier, I was talking about the amount of flying that I do. On average, I fly 3 to 4 times a week. So being on the ground for this time has really given me an opportunity to reflect on some things. And you know what? Miraculously, the work gets done and I'm not in the air as much. So I'm still wrestling with that. I want to talk about Margaret saying that some things we can do that are just challenging, and you asking about a personal story. I have not always been a preacher that could preach about creation justice. I've always cared about the environment. I think I made assumptions about how people think about things. And after all these years in ministry, I recognize the great influence I have as a pastor and the great influence I have as a preacher. And so I think we have a responsibility to deconstruct a theology of superiority of humankind over creation and over animals. I think we're responsible for that. And if one has such a theology, it is easy to assume that everything else is here to serve you, versus all of us being in relationship with God and with one another, and all things, human and otherwise, being in that relationship and being sacred and being holy. I don't think anyone can do that as well as pastors and preachers can. And we don't do it just in the sermon, but we have to do it in Bible studies. We have to do it in conversations. We have to do it in the way we pray. People listen to the way you pray, and they know what is important to us by what we pray for publicly. And so that has been the growing edge and the delightful edge for me, to learn how to speak more freely and more definitively, theologically, about what we are called to do.
Thank you, Traci, for that. I that's so important. Maybe I'll just add a couple things, or just one comment and a new thought. The comment is that I think what we're trying to do, or part of the role of communities of faith, is it's about a shift in consciousness. To me, it's about, we're doing the work of trying to change minds and hearts. Maybe it's an evolutionary leap, but we need to be working to transform how we interpret and perceive our relationship with the rest of God's mysterious, beautiful creation. that God, I don't know why, entrusted to our care. I hope we can start doing a better job. One of the things, I guess, as Stephanie was asking about things we've done that were hard, but we decided to do them, what comes to mind is deciding to risk arrest for the first time. I am not someone who's been arrested multiple times and finds it really easy. I've risked arrest a number of times and been arrested a number of times. But I will say that looking ahead, I'm foreseeing that there will be an increasing need for people of faith and goodwill to stand up and risk arrest, because we are up against powers that seem determined to keep us linked to the fossil fuel industry and to keep us dependent on an economy that is devouring the earth and all its inhabitants, human and more than human. So I think there will be a role for nonviolent civil disobedience in the weeks and days, years ahead. And I hope that's something that we as people of faith will lift up for our folks and be willing to take part in.
All right. Thank you all so much for sharing everything that you just have. We've got some terrific questions, really deep and rich. And I think the way we're going to do this is I will offer a question, and then, and maybe if just one of you wants to take that question, and then we'll see how many we can get to, because there are a bunch. So with that in mind, I kind of want to choose one that connects with where Margaret just left off. And that is, one person was asking about Christians and climate justice. And specifically, here's the question. If for Christians, our goal is heaven, why does it matter how we treat the earth right now? And I feel like, especially for you, Margaret, given the risks that you've just described taking, a lot of people will be like, wait a minute, she's Christian, she's a minister. I thought she was concerned about heaven. Why does what's happening here on the earth matter so much? What would you say?
Well, my goodness, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I would just go to the prayer that Jesus gave us. We may have a vision of heaven, but heaven starts right here. Our, as I see it, our call as followers of Jesus is to, how can we manifest and embody in our own lives the love of God and bring God's shalom, God's vision of justice and mercy, embody that on earth. My heart breaks for versions of Christianity which so separate us from the world that God pronounced good and says, oh, just let it all go. Our point is, it's been called an evacuation plan, God's evacuation plan. It doesn't matter what we do on earth. We're just trying to get out of here and go to heaven. Oh, that's heartbreaking to me. I think we're here to fall in love with each other, fall in love with life, love the God who created it all, and take care of it.
I love that phrase and that image. We're here to fall in love with God, each other, all of creation. Amen. Here's another question. Maybe we'll put this one to Reverend Blackmon, who was just talking about the amount she travels. Good God, I think you travel more than I do, 3 or 4 times a week on a plane, or at least on the road. So if you're not going to be on the road as much, do you see yourself using media like the one that we're on right now, Zoom and other ways of connecting? And how's that working for you?
Well, I may have to go into detox from Zoom. But I just think that that's something that we have to learn to control. I was reading, I wish I could remember where I was reading this, so I apologize, but I'm going to acknowledge that I did read it somewhere. That we have not yet embraced the notion that we cannot do what we were doing before in this moment. And so many of the Zoom calls I have back to back to back are people attempting to prove that we are as productive or that we're doing as much as we were doing when we were in the office. I think as time goes on, we will adjust that and we will be okay with our productivity versus our time on screen. So what this moment has proven to me, when I was in seminary, I read this book. It was not a seminary book. And my seminary would say that wouldn't be a book here, but it was by Eugene Peterson, who is the translator of the Message Bible. He wrote a small little book called The Unnecessary Pastor. And that book has stayed with me my entire ministry, the premise of which was, don't think so much of yourself that you think things can't go on without you, that the church will be the church whether you are the pastor or not, but you can't be a pastor without the church. And I bring that into this conversation because so many of the things we think are so essential to who we are and what we do have been challenged in this moment, right? And we find out that the world is continuing to turn and that things are continuing to happen and the work is continuing to get done. So I'm adjusting to this new way of being. And I'm actually liking not being on the road as much. It's hard on your body. It's difficult to sustain your health that way. And I really do grieve my contribution to the toxicity of the earth by being on planes so much. So we're having this conversation, not just in my head, but in my national setting.
Right in that with you. Thank you. So there's another question we've got here, and I think this is a perfect one to put to Bishop Rice. Someone was wondering, is there any hope that the Episcopal Church will get more specific about becoming a sustainable church, the way that, say, the Presbyterians have done? And this person was asking about, for instance, setting up solar panels and relying on solar energy in larger collectives. And I'm like, geez, tell us about Joaquin. So I now pitch this to you. Please knock it out of the park, sir.
Cheers, sis. Thank you. The quick response to the query is yes, absolutely. I think there's potential. I think there's scope. I think it must happen. So as you were alluding to, we've been working on for about 6 months a diocesan-wide solar project where every faith community in the Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin will have solar at the end of that process, which is a lovely statement about who we are theologically, who we are communally. And I think that changes will have to occur throughout the Episcopal Church in order for that to happen in other dioceses. And it goes back to what I was saying before, everybody, is that it requires singular sermons. It requires every time that we consider formation, we include that in our formation. We include that in our conversations, because to change the behaviors about which Margaret was speaking before requires that we stay on this, and the iteration is over and over and over again. So yeah, Canon, I do think that there is great potential for this and great hope for this, but we can't muck around. We can't wait too long, to be honest with you. I mean, there is great urgency here. And this is our time. This is our time to respond. And I know all people would say amen to that one.
And what I'll offer is that I'm blessed to be able to work with Reverend Bullitt-Jonas and Bishop Rice and a host of leaders across the Episcopal Church on something we call the Episcopal Covenant for Creation Care. And it actually just went up on our brand new website, episcopalchurch.org/creation. Hallelujah. And so you'll find the covenant on the homepage of episcopalchurch.org/creation. But part of what you'll see there is some much more kind of systematic and church-wide thinking and approach to the care of creation and addressing climate justice and the true climate crisis that is upon us. And one of the elements of that covenant, and I credit Margaret Bullitt-Jonas for really kind of like driving on this. She and others kept saying, they're like, so we're glad that we'll have more formation resources and liturgical resources. We're glad that, the Office of Government Relations will help us to be stronger advocates for creation care at the federal and even state levels and local levels. And we're glad that we've got the carbon tracker and can modify our behaviors and just learn more about the impact we're having on this planet. Is there something we can be doing at the diocesan level, at a church-wide level, in order to reduce our carbon footprint, to reduce our energy use, and to set some goals for ourselves, to set goals, real goals around shifting our reliance from fossil fuels to renewable, clean energy. And so one of the things that we've done in that covenant is we've said there's kind of a fourth element to the covenant, and Bishop Rice is offering a lot of leadership on this, but there's a fourth prong that says that the diocese will be encouraged to gather with each other and to set goals together, to encourage each other around, maybe it's a diocese like Bishop Rice's San Joaquin, where they've really been moving, then connect with other dioceses that are moving and take each other even further. And maybe you're in a diocese where they're just getting started to have these conversations. And honestly, maybe there's a lot of pain. I come from a small town in Kentucky, and I know that conversations about climate justice there run into some trouble. I want to have my diocese be in conversation with other dioceses that have to be sensitive, but that still want to make the moves. So please pay attention to that Creation Care Covenant. And when the time comes, we hope that people will sign on as individuals, as congregations, as dioceses, so that we can become a church that is fully committed to sustainability and climate justice. And maybe other people will say, hey, how come our denomination isn't more like those Episcopalians? We look forward to that day.
Amen. Well said, sis. Well said.
You had to put that out there too.
Absolutely.
There's a wonderful question that's here about prophecy. And I feel like when I look at the three of you, I see prophets. So someone was asking, the language of a lot of our faith communities, that language, it nurtures us, it nurtures our theological imagination and our relationship with God. How would you hope that we could become more prophetic in the way that we talk about creation, in the way that we talk about our interconnectedness? Maybe this is a moment to say, what are some tips you might even offer to preachers who are just starting to preach about the care of creation and climate justice? So that's maybe Reverend Blackmon, maybe you might give us a word.
I knew you were coming to me with that question.
You out there preaching.
I also want to say that the United Church of Christ is not slacking behind the Episcopal Church.
Oh, no, you're not.
I preached a sermon a couple of weeks ago just because of the season we're in, for example, about Thomas and the bad rap I think he gets is being doubting because he is not in the room when Jesus first appears after the resurrection. But I used that text to make the point, because I saw in the chat room someone talking about this, so I wanted to offer this. I used that text to make the point that whether or not Thomas doubted or not, did not change the reality of the resurrection, right? That if Thomas had never believed it happened, it still happened, right? If the disciples never came out of the room because they were still afraid and not sure it happened, it still happened. And I use that to talk about those who doubt that climate change is real, right? That it really doesn't matter whether you doubt it, it's here. And the evidence is here, the manifestation of it is here. And so I think as prophetic voices, we have to stand up and declare what is and back that up with scripture, with what we're supposed to do. And that's what I did with that particular text, but you can do it with so many texts. So often when we talk about prophets, we internalize that to mean that these are people who speak into the future. But really, in my opinion, prophets are people who speak into the right now and try to free people who are trapped in what used to be, right? And so we have lots of moments to speak prophetically and powerfully into what we must do I love what Margaret said. She challenged me, and I'm thinking about those words because I say save the earth, but to save ourselves and to save ourselves by honoring this incredible gift of being in communion with the earth and all that it entails.
We have time for me to jump in on the same question.
I wish you would.
Just the opportunity as communities of faith, again, to frame the climate crisis as a spiritual and moral issue. I would see that as part of our prophetic calling. Mm-hmm. It's not just a political issue. It's not just an economic issue or an issue of engineering, or it's a spiritual and moral issue. It's a spiritual issue because if God entrusted the earth to our care, then to destroy it and wreck it is it's like spitting in God's face. It's here. It's filled with the presence of God. It's here for us to protect, and it's a moral issue because in effect we're stealing a habitable world from our children. So we are hurting the poor first and hardest with climate change. So it's an intergenerational justice issue. It's an interracial justice. In many levels, it's a justice issue. So it's a moral issue. And I did see at least one study that said if the public got clear that this was a moral issue, that would provide a social tipping point. You know, we talk about ecological tipping points where a system shifts very quickly. And that's our fear now, is that there's going to be an abrupt climate breakdown, a very abrupt collapse. There can also be a social tipping point. And I think that comes when we as prophets and people of faith say this is a moral issue and we need to live now in right relationship with the earth and her communities.
Stephanie, back to the query about, what is the prophetic voice? I've thought for years it is whenever we practice holy candor, and it's naming as people of faith that everything belongs to God. Everything belongs to God. Therefore, we're to speak into everything. We are to speak the gospel into every aspect of our lives, whether that's gun violence or whether that's the environment or whatever it might be. And that's a learning for the church, because the church I've known in the past oftentimes didn't do that.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful question that Delia Heck just offered. And of course, Delia is a leader that many of us rely on and have great respect for. She's down in Virginia and is also on the task force on creation care and environmental justice. And she just asked, do you ever get discouraged in this work? And if you do, how do you get recharged and back into it? And maybe this will be our final question. I'd love to ask each of you just to offer, in the season of Easter, but also in the season living with COVID, when despair threatens on all sides, when you look at this work of creation care and climate justice, do you ever get discouraged? And what gets you back in?
So I'll go first. And I love Delia to bits. Thanks for the query, sis. And I'm going to be quite personal about this. And it's a very simple offering. So the quick answer is yes, absolutely, I get discouraged. One of the things I do is we have buckets at home in every shower in our house. And so, and we keep those buckets filled after we shower. And so I'll take the water from the bucket and I'll power the toilet with it, and I'll take it outside and I'll water the plants, the garden, and everything else. And in that moment, you and everybody else, that discouragement dissipates somewhat, because I realize in that simple movement, that simple act, that I can make even a small difference. And if you multiply that by whatever else, that's a huge difference. That's where my hope exists.
I'll go next and let Margaret have the last word. I follow a lot of African tradition. And one of the things I cling to when I have moments of despair yes, around climate justice, but around many injustices in this world, is that I am living and doing for the generations that are to come. And that I am where I am because generations before me saw me in the future and lived in ways that would care for me even before I was born. I am living to care for generations to come. And there's great hope in that for me, because I believe that what we do right now will impact every generation that is to come. And that the lessons that we teach and the ways that we live and the ways that we make a difference will be fed into the future generations, and they will do more, and they will do more, and they will do more. And it will continue until we get this right. I may not live to see that. It's like the roll call of faith in Hebrews. I may not be here when we reach where we need to be, but I can see it because I live for those generations.
Oh, thank you, Traci. That's beautiful. I think enlarging the space and time is certainly the way to go, so that we can receive the blessings of our ancestors and then offer the blessings we can to those who come after us. Yes, I definitely get discouraged. Yes. So I make a space. I have a little prayer space at home. I have a space where I pray, and I make a big space for grief. I'm someone who just needs to let it be experienced and move through me. And I've learned over the years, I remember learning from Henry Nouwen that there are two ways to grieve. One way is to grieve by oneself and just feeling completely alone. And that's the kind of grief that leaves us feeling no better when we quit crying than when we were there. But the other way of grieving is to grieve within the embrace of love. So I try to pray my grief. I pray it on behalf of all living beings, all those who are suffering now and may suffer in the years ahead. But I feel as if I'm praying with in the Holy Spirit, and that so it's full of love. It's opening. It's allowing myself. I grieve because I love. We didn't have a chance to talk about the scripture passages that mean the most to us, but I will just say, I go with John 10:10 when Jesus says, "I've come that they may have life and have it abundantly," or have it to the full. So I feel whenever we fall in love with life and let that life energy, that spirit of love move through us, we may need to weep as we let it come through, but it's a spirit of life. And that there's a joy in that, because I feel as if each of us is participating in something that is so much larger than we are.
Indeed, we are. So thank you all for a word of hope and a word that is true, because we need all of those for the living of these days and for facing the climate crisis and for learning to truly live the way that God intends us to live on this earth with one another and with all of the earth's inhabitants. So thank you for sharing with us. Thanks to all of you who have joined. And I want to turn it over now to our friends from Washington National Cathedral to close us out.
Well, there's hardly anything to say from the cathedral perspective, except that we are blessed by the presence and the work and the prayerfulness and the heartfelt offerings that you have each given us tonight. I want to thank those who were commenting on Facebook and in the chat here. It's so abundantly clear that there is love and heart and passion for this world and for our creation that is not just contained in this virtual space within which we live, but that is rich and diverse, and that we are blessed as many churches and as the world by the work that is happening. So I want to close by saying thank you on behalf of Dean Hollerith and on behalf of the staff and others at the Cathedral and the Diocese of Washington, and with a prayer from the liturgies that have been referenced earlier. And this comes from Genesis and from the Psalms and from Colossians and from John. So this is the kinship and unity of all creation in Christ. God, maker of marvels, you weave the planet and all its creatures together in kinship. Your unifying love is revealed in the interdependence of relationships in the complex world that you have made. Save us from the illusion that humankind is separate and alone, and join us in communion with all inhabitants of the universe. Through Jesus Christ, our Redeemer, who topples the dividing walls by the power of your Holy Spirit, and who lives and reigns with you forever and ever. Amen. Thank you all. You can share this via the archive on YouTube, where it will live after we are done tonight. And we are blessed to have you with us. And we will see you in the world. Good night.
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 Good night.
Night.
Peace.
Thank you.